A pleasant good afternoon, and what an honor to be here. I would like to thank the Firewalkers Association for the invitation. A welcome to everyone who's out there in the audience. For me, this is a very historical site, and as one who truly believes in the importance of our history, we stand on the ground right here of our ancestors. Very powerful. I'll take a moment just to recognize them. We're in very spiritual, powerful grounds. My name is Genevieve Whitaker. I was born and raised here on the island of St. Croix. As I was expressed, born and raised by a single grandmother, whom I'm named after. A woman who raised me to understand the importance of community, giving back, the importance of education, because one thing my grandmother emphasized is that knowledge is power. I also had the opportunity from a very young age to be involved in our community. Growing up right here in St. Croix, I reflect on my own educational experience. I went to parochial and public school, attending St. Mary's School. I also lived in the US, lived in the state of Maryland, my mom, my stepfather, where I also had great exposure to history particularly of the US, even in terms of slavery history. I graduated from the complex, went on to undergrad, where I obtained a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Government and World Affairs. My thesis focused a lot on the issue of human rights. I graduated with honors program distinction, went on to law school, where I focused on international human rights law. During my time in law school, and even before then in between, I was a mentor to young children. While in law school, I was a foster care mother, an advocate for children in the States. Continuing on into law school, I was a public service fellow. Part of my fellowship was, in fact, giving back to the community. After going to law school to obtain my law degree, with emphasis in international law, I came back home about 10 days after law school with a commitment to give back to our community. I started my first job in the 27th legislature, working as legal counsel, drafting bills. And I was largely hired because during law school and undergrad, research and writing was my forte, called upon by professors to be their research assistant and so on.
Platform.
I continued on, and after coming home, my professional background, working as a law clerk in our Superior Court. Also, for those of you familiar with the reparations movement, I served as the legal counsel for the reparations movement, ACRA, the African Caribbean Reparations and Resettlement Alliance. I also co-founded a youth organization called the Virgin Islands Youth Advocacy Coalition, focused on civics. Through that organization, last year, former President Obama, through the Obama Foundation, recognized me for the commitment I've had to civics, because 2 years ago, two things happened. The Virgin Islands Board of Education invited me to be a keynote speaker on civics. I was also invited that same year by current Senator Novelle Francis to testify in support of civics in our schools. I also went back to school, obtaining 2 additional degrees, one in political management and one focused on strategic criminal justice management and building my capacity and understanding of our issues, especially crime prevention. I've also currently served for over 9 years as a professor at the University of the Virgin Islands, with the Virgin Islands, where I've taught courses in criminal justice, crime prevention, and teach business law. Now today I'm here now as your aspirant, as your advocate and your champion. I have put forward a 6-part platform centered on our economic revitalization, on our educational revitalization, on the reform of our healthcare and healthcare infrastructure, on crime prevention and criminal justice reform, because before you, I'm also a criminal justice advocate, because also, when I was in school, I was out there helping people, because in the state of Florida, we had children on death row, we had convict people who were, basically held guilty for crimes they didn't commit. And our environment, which is key. As we look around us, the beauty that we enjoy, we must preserve it. And we also at the same time now talking about what my action plan, what will I do? As you've heard on the radio, if you listen to the ads, in the case of economic revitalization, 2 measures I will sponsor. One focused on rebuilding our schools, our hospitals, our housing communities, and people and building your own residential community where you live in terms of rebuilding as we move forward. A tax-exempt bonding program. Also to promote nonprofits, which ties into my passion for education. In terms of education reform, literacy is the foundation of all learning. We have a literacy crisis. So through an effort we have counselors here, I've already began discussions with intervention specialists to help our children from the very beginning stages of their life in terms of their education. When I also speak of economic development in the context of geotourism, as an advocate for promoting St. Croix especially with our history, getting people to come here, but at the same time ensuring that our children have the proper curriculum. I've long advocating holding the government currently accountable for the teaching of Virgin's Caribbean history. Moving on to crime prevention, which has been proposed before, but I'm going to continue to champion that, to sponsor legislation to promote a teen program and youth around the issues surrounding youth crime prevention. And finally, we cannot do anything without a good healthcare system. I'm already in discussions with persons, doctors and nurses and people, and right here on this island, right here in the Virgin Islands, who are engaged in healthcare and listening to their challenges. And when we speak about healthcare, it's the structure themselves. We have to rebuild our hospitals and our clinics and so on. But the importance of healthcare education and even the importance of alternative healthcare, which would include revamping our hospital boards so we can in fact recruit more individuals, to include our very Virgin Islanders who've gone away, and ensuring that we encourage those to pursue the healthcare field. I come before you, and the promise that I make to you, we are in definitely a fight. But I say, as we are in this trail, you have to look to people who can then lead you. We have to do that in building what will be a healthy Virgin Islands community. What would a healthy St. Croix look like? I can assure you that when I move forward with my colleagues to pass legislation, you will be a stakeholder at the table. Already as part of my candidacy, I have a focus group on education, one on economic development, one on healthcare, reaching out to persons and stakeholders, putting out surveys, doing the work that's necessary in moving forward.
Okay,
And I will end it there because I want to open up for questions. Thank you. Number 21 on the ballot.
Okay, we have a question for you, Aspirant Whitaker. Winston. Good afternoon, candidate Genevieve Whitaker.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, mosquito teared me up, but
No, I will not.
they love my blood.
My question to you, and I get this question by walking down the street in Frederiksted. The question is, when elected, what sustainable legislation that you have and will propose?
And sustainable, you're talking about in terms of the environment, or sustainable in terms of
Duration.
duration?
Yeah, in terms
That's correct.
of long impact.
Duration.
Definitely. And thank you for that question. So I'm already a person who does a lot of comprehensive legislation, because when I came in, if everybody remembers the property tax crisis, I will look to sponsoring legislation that would impact us in a great, so for example, property taxes was a huge one, it still remains. Sustainable would mean that when we talk about sustainable, it really involves you having people at the table. So a lot of times we pretty much pass laws that just kind of nitpick. Right now we have a law on the Counseling Association, a counseling board that has not been enacted, as an example. Sustainable will also involve me holding the executive branch accountable. As I reiterated, I am now holding the government of the Virgin Islands, the Department of Education, accountable for the Virgin Islands, along with others, for the teaching of Virgin Islands Caribbean history. Thank you.
Right.
And with that answer, I have to say I admire you. I have to say that you also would be a fresh here if you get elected in the Senate. I advocated that all 7 senators from St. Croix should be women. Now, with that said, when elected, what chairmanship would you assume and why?
Thank you for the question. Definitely, a committee on education, youth, and culture is one I would definitely chair. I will continue to, because literacy, curriculum, all of those matters fall under that committee, and essentially moving forward with our curriculum crisis, issue of vocational, and so on. So I would definitely chair. And when we talk about culture, I stand before you today as a fellow for the International Decade of People of African Descent. I was selected by United Nations in 2016, selected again last year to represent the Virgin Islands issue of decolonization. I'm also a human rights, I've taught children human rights law. So for me, I would continue that effort with my colleagues and really encourage a whole holistic approach to education.
Okay, staying on that vein that Winston brought forth, now you've stated the chairmanship that you would seek, education. What aspects of the department that you want to delve into to investigate, to see what's going on behind the scenes? Because as you're aware, we spend just about the most money per capita per student than a lot of states or jurisdictions on the mainland. Yes. So what aspect would you be really focusing on as a chairperson of the Committee on Education?
So what I want to highlight, and I didn't make that clear, I'm serving as the Deputy Supervisor of Elections, and that I'm on a leave of absence. But I'm very familiar with how the accounting system works in terms of what's going on. With the Department of Education, it's very top-heavy, and they're not held accountable. I watch committee hearings constantly. And so holding them accountable would also look to amending and providing, maybe perhaps you're looking at the superintendent position being one where the Board of Education would hire that person, amendment to that law. But it's too top-heavy. And I'll point out a quick fact that the Virgin Islands has not adopted the Every Child Should Succeed national standards that was passed in 2015. So I do plan on working with the board and the Department of Education to move forward in the implementation of those standards, and when and to address the issues of spending within the department. That goes across government board. We have a lot of misspending. We use a lot of paper. We need to get in terms of e-government, so things like that. But I'll focus really on essentially revamping the structure of the Department of Education. There are too many positions, and holding the superintendent, and just kind of reducing definitely the top heaviness of the department.
All right, under the same vein, Aspirant Whitaker, the Department of Education has taken the Board of Education to court several years ago over jurisdiction fighting. It is said that the Board of Education, an elected position that we neglect to vote for people, they have no teeth. What would you do? What would you do with the Board of Education in terms of bringing them into line in terms of their responsibilities and that mechanism to make it a more cohesive interaction between the department and the board? And I know that personalities is always a factor, but I would like your opinion on this.
So the lawsuit was filed 5 years ago. Yeah. I assisted them with the lawsuit, just to put that out there. I will highlight that it's a matter, we don't need to always take people to court, and in fact, mediation should be the first option. What I will say is that we have to, in fact, I'm definitely willing to work with the curriculum director. We, members of the education committee, sit down, have a meeting, but I'll be honest, if they do not comply and we have mediation, it breaks down, then the lawsuit will be the option. But we do not want to spend our time always in court. the abilities of the legislature for oversight and
2 minutes.
investigation.